On this week's 51%, we speak with lifelong activist and former 9 to 5 director Ellen Bravo and her husband Larry Miller about their new book Standing Up, based on their personal experiences fighting for unionization and workers' rights.
There's systemic change that needs to happen, and that doesn't happen by one person on their own.
We're also saving up. Our Dr. Sharon Ufberg speaks with finance guru Ann Lester about how young women can better take advantage of the tools around them to save for their futures. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. I'm Jessie King. Thanks for joining us, and happy September. Labor Day is Monday the 5th, and while it's often used to signal kids going back to school and the end of summer, it's really meant as a day to rest and recognize the contributions of everyday working people and the American labor movement. It feels particularly important this year. While recent decades have generally seen a decline in workers organizing, the U.S. has experienced a spike in unionization efforts since the coronavirus pandemic, with high-profile wins for employees at some Starbucks locations and Amazon warehouses. Our main guests today have a combined experience of almost a century fighting for workers' rights and other social causes. Ellen Bravo spent more than 20 years working with and then directing 9 to 5, the National Association of Working Women. She has a number of nonfiction works under her belt, including the 9 to 5 Guide to Combating Sexual Harassment and Taking on the Big Boys, or Why Feminism is Good for Families, Business, and the Nation. Her husband, Larry Miller, is a former union member, teacher, administrator, and school board member with the Milwaukee Public Schools, as well as an editor of the grassroots magazine promoting social change in education called Rethinking Schools. Together, the couple draw from their own experiences and from those of their peers for their new novel Standing Up, Tales of Struggle, a collection of interconnected stories illustrating decades of labor movements. As the characters in their book struggle to organize and grapple with issues like unsafe work environments, sexual harassment, abusive relationships, racism, and economic inequality, Bravo says they learn to stand up for themselves and for one another.
I wanted to write this book to highlight what Mbolo Mbui calls the deliberately unheard. You know, you so seldom read novels about the people who do the essential work in our society. And I'm talking about laundry workers and ticket takers and people who make steel things and people who, you know, handle billing. And at the same time, people who are caring for kids and working on relationships that may in fact be abusive and so many other struggles in their lives. So we wanted to center those situations, but at the same time, show in particular the moments when people realize this stuff is not inevitable and it can change, and I can be part of changing it, not all by myself, but together with other people. And the reason we did fiction is, first of all, the book spans 50 years. So I think unless you have a journal of every day of your life, there are going to be things you forget of exact conversations. And so that allowed us to fill in those gaps. But also, it meant we could highlight some characters who are really composites of wonderful people that we've known. So Vanessa, for example, is a key character, emerges in the book. You meet her first going to a welfare hearing. She's a neighbor of this woman, Sophie. And then you see her get involved in the Working Women's Group. You see her become a board member of the Working Women's Group. And then you see her in a work situation where she thinks, why have I been doing this for other women and never thinking about it for my own job? And so on. So that gave us more flexibility.
So just to start off, what are some of the hardships and working conditions that your characters have to face over the course of this book?
So let's start with, the book follows a couple, a guy named Nick, a young white working class kid from Wisconsin who goes south to get involved in the struggle and really learn from Black workers. And then a few chapters later, he meets a woman named Sophie in Baltimore, and we see a lot of struggles that she's involved in. And then side characters who become key characters. And then we go back to see Nick as a teacher, and then we see Sophie and Vanessa, for example, training firefighters and sexual harassment. So let's start with a story in the South in the laundry.
This is reflects something that I did at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. So Nick goes to work actually looking for employment at the time, and this is where he received it, not really knowing the conditions there. He gets assigned to the laundry. He's the only white worker in the laundry, 40 women and 7 men, and just observes immediately horrible working conditions where actually the hospital would have people throw bundled up the contaminated laundry and even pieces of flesh wrapped up in the laundry down these chutes, and then they would come over to the laundry and we'd unfold them, and it starts with a worker being horrified by what she saw. I was actually there in that scene, and then what we tried to show was how the situation grew into a struggle for decent working conditions and also for an issue of hiring of Black managers. It was all white managers, all Black employees. And so we wanted to start with that because a real experience. And then it, grows to some of the industrial work that I experienced. And then it goes to the work that Ellen was involved in as the book continues.
And the working conditions, in addition to unsafe and dangerous and completely unhealthy conditions, people face low pay, disrespect, sexual harassment, discrimination on the basis of race of every kind, a disregard for anything having to do with family and care, people being told you can't be sick for 5 years, things like that.
You do share a number of stories of sexual harassment as well as abuse in this book. For one of your characters, Soledad, it's almost seen as a condition of employment. Of course, this is decades before the Me Too movement. Do you feel things have improved since then? And how do you feel about the way we tackle sexism and harassment in the labor sector now?
Well, the good news is when we started this, when this book starts, there is no term for sexual harassment. There is actually a law, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but nobody was applying the concept of gender discrimination to sexual harassment. And people didn't know that they had rights. And if they did, they didn't know who to call or what to do. That's all changed. And, thanks to a lot of brave women of color like Anita Hill. And then, 9 to 5, the organization took this up in the 90s. And then the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. So that's really exciting. On the other hand, there are 2 justices on the Supreme Court who are either a sexual harasser or a sexual assaulter. And until recently, we had someone in the White House who was a sexual predator, and they all got away with it. So there's a lot of work to do. And, this situation is especially dangerous for women of color, low-wage women who are in jobs where they often hear a boss say, who are they going to believe? You're a nobody going against a somebody. And that's a pretty daunting situation. So one of the things we hope the book will do is add to this understanding that you're not on your own. And when you speak up with others, you really can make progress.
There has been an increased focus on unions, especially over the past year. Why do you think this is popping up again now, and how does it compare to some of your efforts and the experiences you wrote about in this book?
So one of the things that's happened over the last number of years is the economy's transition from large industrial centers to smaller industrial centers, but also a huge gig economy and a huge service economy. And I think that, you saw a decline in the number of union members as a percentage in the workforce over a number of years. And I think a lot of, for example, millennials grew up, they had family that were in unions and stuff, but there was, we can make it on our own sort of thing. And now as they've entered the workforce and see the oppressive conditions and the exploitation, I think we're starting to see a new growth. And I think this is just the beginning. We had a coffee shop, Colectivo, 200 employees here in Milwaukee that voted in a union. And it's just, we're seeing, a single spark can start something big. And I think that we're at the beginning of that.
The other thing that's been true is that there's been a number of unions like the Service Employees Union 1199, United Food and Commercial Workers, who have made a progress by organizing among low-wage immigrant workers and women workers, and justice for janitors, that movement. So in the last decade, it isn't really just the last year, there's been a lot of progress and more leadership by people who aren't necessarily the image that folks have of a union member, who they might think more of a white guy in a hard hat. And I think that's inspired people as well, is what Larry was saying, in addition to that.
And if you look at the role of women as teachers, we've seen significant resistance with the strike in West Virginia, of all places, and Oklahoma. These are right-to-work states where we just thought of the teachers' unions as being very weak, even though they are organizing there. But women as teachers just have shown huge leadership.
In your book, what are some of the obstacles or deterrents your characters are facing when they try to unionize? Is it all that much different from the tactics you see companies using today?
So there's a union struggle in the chapter called "The Union Makes Us Strong" in the mid-90s. First of all, as always, there is no substitute for building relationships, listening to people, having conversations, and just one by one winning people over. But the union busting techniques of captive audience meetings and spreading lies and misinformation, using every means they have of intimidating workers, and the workers organizing, including in the bathrooms and outside of work on their breaks. A lot of what's in our novel was resonating with exactly what they were doing in Amazon.
The thing that's been critical in terms of uniting workers has to be the fight against racism, and along with misogyny and gender issues. But you see today that has not changed. There's still the attempt to divide white workers from workers of color. You can look at the issue of immigrant workers. I mean, it's profound how that's being used, where immigrant workers will be hired, but then they'll be thrown out when it's convenient for companies, or when they come under criticism. Yet corporate America uses these workers in an awful way. The divide and rule concept is it takes different forms at different points, but it's the same idea.
There's a character in your book named Dory who is required to pursue policies that hurt workers on her own climb up the corporate ladder, but she says she will shake things up when she's the one in power. Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to include this character in the book, and how do you feel about it? Do you feel efficient change can come from the top?
Yeah, so Jane Fonda called me once, 15 years ago, and that was looking to do a sequel to the movie 9 to 5 because women were clamoring for it when she did a book tour on a memoir. And she had this idea that the character she played in the original 9 to 5 would have a daughter who was now grown up and working like a wild person, and that she, Dolly, and Lily would do an intervention. But she didn't really know what the issues were, and that's why she called. And I said to her, well, I'm glad to tell you I know the issues, and I also know the daughter. I know how she's getting screwed over by the men at the top, but I know what she's doing to the women who work under her in order to make that climb. And we need to include that as well. That never materialized into the sequel that she wanted. And I got her permission to, use it in a novel. And I really wanted to tell the story. I made her the daughter of Annie, one of the women who stands up at the call center of an airline. Just a simple thing of standing up for a minute while they were still working, holding their keyboards in the crook of their arms. And that action gave Annie the courage to leave an abusive marriage. And then her husband took her kids and she had to figure out a way to get them back. So here's this kid, grew up 6 years old with that background, living in very low, where her mom had very low wages, and wanted to grow up so that she would never be dependent, that she could take care of herself, and thinking if she got a good job and was in a powerful position, she could make things better for other single moms and women in trouble. And along the way, what she has to do to get ahead changes her into somebody really frightening. And so the next time we see her, after we see her as this child, she's the awful manager that in a story called Magic Monday. And one of the reasons I wanted to include it is to show a moment, in this case, it's her mother who does the intervention, where her mother uses her own life, and that she could have been the child screaming in a setting that she saw, her staff person's kid do, and get her to identify and see that she really wasn't that different. And it's a great moment. And I have seen people have exactly those kind of aha moments. But what Dory learns is that change doesn't come from the top. It has to come from the bottom up, that she can be an ally, she can help, but she needs to listen to the women who work under her and help expose what's happening as the only way to save herself from a situation of extreme sexual harassment and abuse that she's been taking from the CEO.
I guess that kind of goes in line with one of your phrases in the book. The best way to get anything for yourself is to get it for everyone.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of well-meaning people who use words like empowerment and say to women or people of color or other groups who've been discounted and discriminated against, believe in yourself, have confidence in yourself, and you can be whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. It is important to have confidence in yourself, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge there are real barriers. There is systemic change that needs to happen. And that doesn't happen by one person on their own. It has to happen through collective action.
Well, lastly, and I think you've definitely touched on it, what do you hope readers most take away from your book?
Well, I hope they'll take away several things. In addition to this delight in seeing people step into power and seeing that we can and do win and what it takes to do that, I hope they'll also see that being an activist or an organizer it can be joyous, and that folks who do it are just like everybody else. They have families, they fall in love, and that this is a life that lots of other people can participate in as well.
I think it's very important for us to look at our children and young people and what their role is. Our kids and the kids in the movement have always been significant, and it comes out in a number of chapters in preparing for events. The one about children going to the state legislature, they actually take the lead. The article about don't pollute our playgrounds, the students at the high school actually do lead the struggle to end pollution, which it's a true story here in Milwaukee, and it's critical.
Ellen Bravo and Larry Miller are lifelong activists and authors of Standing Up, Tales of Struggle, out now on Hardball Press. You can learn more at Bravo's website. That's ellenbravo.com. Ellen and Larry, thank you both for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
We're going to switch gears somewhat now to talk money. After we get through our jobs every day, how can we better save and use the money we earn to support our goals and save for our futures? The very concept of retirement, of course, can be a privilege because there are a lot of people who never get to do it, and the prospect of amassing the savings needed for it can be pretty daunting. Our next guest is determined to help women and younger generations take advantage of the tools around them and start saving earlier and smarter. Ann Lester is a widely described finance guru who has worked in all aspects of retirement planning for 28 years. Most recently, she spent more than 20 years as head of retirement solutions at J.P. Morgan Asset Management, but she's also offered her advice in a number of publications, including CNBC, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times, and testified on policy recommendations in hearings for the U.S. Department of Labor and the Securities Exchange Commission. She spoke with our Dr. Sharon Ufberg, co-founder of the California-based personal development and wellness company Borrowed Wisdom, for her 51% segment, Force of Nature.
So what are the main issues around saving money, particularly with women and especially younger women?
Well, I think, we can break that apart into two pieces. I think young people in general, right? And then we'll talk about women specifically, but young people in general, you're just starting out, you're adulting maybe for the first time, especially for younger folks whose parents haven't helped them understand how to budget, how to manage on a fixed income, which is basically, and you get a salary, you're earning your income however you're earning it, may be more or less reliable, but you've got expenses, and it takes a while to figure out the cash flow, right? What's coming in, what's going out. What seems like a great thing, you don't understand that there are all these other, a car, you think about the car payment and maybe gas, you don't think about maintenance, you don't think about, all these other costs that surprise you as you're learning how to budget. So there's, I think, one issue with just learning how to manage your cash flow. There's another issue with behavioral economics with young people in general, and that's that it's really hard to imagine that future person that you should be saving for, yourself in 60 years as you, right? Your brain thinks about them as if they were a stranger. So saving for that future person involves sacrificing things that are painful. I won't go out. I won't go hang out with my friends. I won't take that fun weekend trip because I need to save. So that causes you pain in the moment. And the gratification, the good feeling you get for that saving is never as powerful as the pain. That's one behavioral thing. And the second one is that you're saving for this random stranger, yourself, but you don't even feel it's yourself. So that's hard for young people. Specifically, though, for women, it gets more complicated on top of all that because women are more likely to be working in service industries that have lower pay to start out with. So it's harder to make ends meet. It's harder to find that income to save. Secondly, there is a real wage gap for women, regardless of what industry you're in. So, there's that 87% kind of thing. Third, because of the service industry jobs many women take or the part-time nature of work, they're often working for companies in industries or in specific roles in companies that don't offer benefits, either healthcare or the ability to contribute to a 401k plan automatically. And that's the number one reason people don't save, is that it's not easy. And then, as women get older, right, they start stepping away from the workforce, either temporarily or permanently, to raise families. So all of that means that it's harder for women to save. They save less, they make less, they have less access to savings. They have these episodic breaks in their career, whether it's 6 months or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years where they're not saving. And then you're likely to live longer. So you actually need to save more than the guys do because they don't live as long. So there's sort of good news, bad news there, right? The good news is you live longer. The bad news is you got to save more. So you add up that together. And in some research I did last summer, even women who are Gen Z, that is age 25 and younger, are less prepared if you project what they're doing forward than the guys were. And they haven't typically started stepping out of the workforce to have children. So I found that really alarming, actually, that even 2 or 3 years in, they were still saving less than their male peers. And that I think is very troubling.
They're all issues that women have been facing for a long, long time. So I know, though, on the flip side, you're offering some solutions. I'd love to hear those so we can still take a deep breath here.
Well, and the good news is for people in their 20s and 30s, you've got, time is your friend. Time is rocket fuel that will help your money grow. And the more you save in your 20s and 30s, the more time it has to grow. And, compound, it doesn't feel like that maybe, as you're watching a lot of volatility in the stock market and, it goes up, it goes down, it's going down as we record this. But eventually it will go back up again. And even in the financial crisis, even in 2001, even, in 2022, as the markets are selling off, right, the money you put into your investment accounts today is going in at lower rates and will grow more when the markets recover. So, really the trick is to try to save as much as you can when you're young, which is, when you don't have the money. So it's hard. But there are a couple of tricks that I think work really well. It's what the 401k industry has done for years to try to help people save more. And one thing to realize is you don't have to start with very much money. You can start with just 1 or 2 or 3% of your paycheck, $50 a month, whatever it is, just start. You don't have to start with some huge number. And once you start, then the trick is to make it automatic, make it come out of your paycheck before it hits your bank account or the day it hits your bank account so that you're not tempted to spend it. It doesn't exist really because it's just disappeared before you get it. And then the second trick, automate number one, the second trick is to increase how much you're saving as your income goes up. The thing I think works really well is for every increase in income, every time you get a raise, every time you get a bonus, save half of it. Don't save all of it because, especially with inflation, you do need to give yourself increased spending power. And let's face it, if you're earning more money, it's nice to enjoy some of it, right? This can't be all pain and no fun. But you do want to make sure you continue to raise the percentage of your income that you're saving until you get, I don't know, to 10 or 15% of your income just for retirement, right? And that will set you up, if you get there by the time you're in your mid to late 30s and keep doing that, even as you maybe buy a house, all those other expenses start coming in. If you stay on track with that savings, you will have a very comfortable retirement.
I remember when we first spoke, you, I think, gave such good advice when you mentioned about not checking the balance too frequently on the savings. Can you speak to that? Because I think it is an issue for people who aren't seeing the savings pile up fast enough if they're checking too often.
Well, and I think there are two problems with checking often, right? One is that, if you're saving $50 or $100 a month, it takes a while for it to build up, and it takes even longer if the markets are not going up a lot as well. And sometimes they go backwards and you're going down. Like you put in $100 and, in 3 months' time you look and it's worth 90 or 85. It doesn't feel very good. You put in another $100 and suddenly you've got 185, and maybe it doesn't feel quite as bad. You're doing something called dollar cost averaging, by the way. So you're actually, that's a very good way to invest gradually over time, a little bit every month or a little bit every paycheck. But the other thing I tell people is only look at your balance on your birthday, because the other thing that happens when you're checking a lot is you're in the system, you're online, and it's really easy to let fear in particular, but also greed, start messing with you. And you start thinking, well, I better change something. I'm anxious because I see the market's going down. Or, ooh, goody, the market's gone up a lot. I should put more money into my riskier assets. I should put more money into stocks because they keep going up. Won't that be fun, right? And then, that works for a while and then it doesn't. So the temptation to mess around, to meddle, to tinker, to sell and buy, the more you look, and especially when you're anxious about what the economy is doing or the markets are doing, the more likely, frankly, you are to do something stupid and sell at exactly the wrong time. And for those of us who are professional investors, capitulation, when people throw in the towel and give up, is a real thing. And you can look at what consumers do as they trade their own accounts. And it's pretty clear in hindsight when most people give up, and that's generally at the absolute bottom of the market when you see people sell things. And guess what? Selling low and then buying it back when you feel better emotionally about it, buying high, is a great way to lose money. That's not how you make money. You have to buy low and sell high, and that's the opposite of what your brain wants you to do. And so checking infrequently also puts some guardrails around that.
I'm wondering if you have any advice for the young woman entrepreneur, the woman who started her own business. She's not getting a paycheck from anybody. No one's setting up a 401k for her. What do you tell those women who really would like to start saving, but they don't have like the construct behind them that really helps make that happen?
Yeah, it's to me something I'm really passionately involved in on the sort of public policy side. And there's some terrific legislation now in front of Congress to make it easier and that more companies offer 401k plans. But if you're a sole proprietor, if you're working in the gig economy, if you're cobbling it together, it's still really challenging. And it's hard work to get yourself started. If you do own your own business and you're an entrepreneur, talk to your accountant about what would be the most advantageous way for you specifically to set this up. If you don't have that trusted advisor in your life, really you can't go wrong. Just to start with getting an IRA going, there are a lot of different ways to, once your startup is making money, to start managing different tax advantage ways of taking some of that as income and using it in a SEP plan, which is a single employer plan where you can actually contribute a great deal of money to your own retirement fund. But just getting started with an IRA is terrific. And you can do that online with any name brand brokerage place. You can do that at your bank. They all have programs. And, again, as you get more and more assets, right, your account gets bigger and bigger, it really becomes very important to start paying attention to the level of fees and, making sure you're being really thoughtful about it. But really, when you're just starting out, the single most important thing to do is to make it easy for yourself to do it, because once you start doing it, you start building muscle, and then you can start getting sort of more refined. It's like starting anything, right? You don't start, in graduate school. You start by learning the alphabet. So, when you're saving, just start saving. Emergency fund first and foremost, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you need that 3 to 6 month savings because you don't know what's going to happen to your income. And then, really start thinking about those long-term savings and investment, and, make it simple for yourself, because more people fail by trying to do it perfectly and just give up. And that's the worst thing you can do.
Thank you so much. That's Ann Lester. You can find her at annlester.com. And this is Dr. Sharon Ufberg on Force of Nature for 51%.
Thanks for listening to this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. It's produced by me, Jesse King. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartock, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. A big thanks again to our guests today, Ellen Bravo, Larry Miller, Ann Lester, and Dr. Sharon Ufberg. To learn more about the topics we discuss on this show and just the show in general, check us out at WAMCpodcast.org. Until next week, thanks again for tuning in. Have a happy Labor Day. Get some of that well-deserved rest. I'm Jesse King for 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. At night